Hello there, how's it going? Loki the Scottish rapper here. You might know me by my other name, Cunto, or Darren McGarvey. This week I am 2 years clean and sober. Continuous sobriety. Continuous sobriety differs from other forms of sobriety which I've had in the past, which wasn't real sobriety and was actually me just not drinking, white knuckle riding through life, occasionally dabbling in codeine-based painkillers and cannabis to varying degrees of success until I eventually relapsed. Continuous sobriety is when you have one day at a time consecutively over a period until you get to 2 years, and that's where I'm at. I know that there's a lot of people out there who struggle with alcohol, who struggle with drug use, or who struggle with other issues that they have in terms of regulating their own behaviour in relation to coping strategies that they've developed in order to manage emotions. And for me, this is the key thing. So while I'm obviously talking about alcoholism and addiction here, what I can tell you from my own experience is that the behaviour that I would characterise as addictive transfers onto other aspects of my life beyond the things that I've stopped. The reason that I've stopped the things I've stopped is because of how harmful they were. So I stopped taking drugs and I stopped drinking because they're quite potent. So if I'm using them to manage my emotions and then I'm actually losing control and my behaviour changes and I have a psychic shift when I'm under the influence of these things, then actually it makes my problem even worse. So you end up hitting them on the head, and the fags that got binned a couple of years later. I've not had a cigarette for over a year. But I can't say that the emotional difficulties that I experienced or that fueled a lot of my drinking and drug use are completely gone. Instead, what I have is an insight into where they come from, what they mean, and how to live my life so as to reduce the amount of emotional discomfort that I come into. The first point of this is to recognise that there is a problem and concede that there is a problem, and no ifs and no buts and no I but what if this, and there was this one time 2 years ago where I had a drink and I didn't explode, so that means I'm not an alcoholic, or I've only shat myself a few times. I know alcoholics that shit themselves every week. I'm definitely not an alcoholic. Or I've only been in the jail once, and so on and so forth. There was a time when I was walking about Govan Hill full of jellies, drinking a tin, a Stella Artois, on my way to the bevy shop at 10 in the morning, chain smoking fags, being loud in the street, and forcing the door in a close to go in there and probably piss and smoke until the office opened. See, if I'd have walked past myself and looked in, what do you think I would have thought of myself? I would have thought, perhaps harshly, definitely harshly, nick of that wee junkie. Get your fucking life sorted, that's terrible, disrespectful. In somebody else's close at that time, making that kind of racket. Shame on you. Now, I might then wind back for that judgment and realise maybe that's a harsh way to judge people, but we all react instinctively. The point is, in my mad head full of jellies in the close at the time with my best mate at the time, I didn't think I was the Ned. Fucking hell, nothing could be further from the truth. I had such a grandiose idea of what I was in my drunk head that it never occurred to me what I actually was, which was a wee boy who had developed a sense of entitlement to be free from difficult emotions, and that this had led to me setting up different compulsions in order to cope, which were fundamentally changing not just the way that I lived my life, but also the direction of my life. So after 10 years of doing that, I decided I actually can't do this anymore. So I decided I'm going to stop. The thing about trying to stop is that you can only stop for so long and then you end up drinking and using again. So for me, the key became about getting sober and then getting more of an insight into what was it that was dragging me back for a drink. And what I learned was it was this idea in my head this mental idea, this idea that kept coming back no matter what happened, that this time it's going to be different. This time I can have the drink. This time I can have the drug. This time I can have the insert your vice. That idea comes back time and time again. And what I ended up learning by surrounding myself with people who had been through this journey was that that's the madness in my brain that I will never fix. That's the madness in my brain that I will never reconcile. And so the only thing I can do is admit defeat, and that I will never be able to think honestly about drinking or drugging or any other vice you care to mention ever again. And so when it comes to alcohol and it comes to drugs, the only choice I have is to not lift them at all. Because when I do, and we all know for our experience of just going to have one biscuit and the whole packet's done, just going to watch one porno and you're 3 hours down and you're like, ah, what the fuck, feeling like a zombie. You know what I mean? Just going to have small fries and a Diet Coke. 3 weeks later, you're well into a junk food binge, and so on and so forth. There's something about the way that my brain works, and there's a lot of science to back it up. The minute I take a substance into my system that I'm addicted to, or the minute I engage in a behaviour that is addictive behaviour, then it reignites all of the neural pathways in my mind and all of the emotional associations which are so strong that I immediately return to the behaviour as if I had never stopped. So there's no starting from scratch, there's no being sober for a couple of weeks or a couple of years and then getting a few years drinking in you again. When I relapsed, I went straight back to drinking the amount that I did drink before, except I had no psychological threshold for it. I was still physically okay, but I was off my nut, and I have to be off my nut to lift a drink in the first place. So I call this alcoholism, but alcoholism is really the word that I'm using to describe all of my personality traits which manufacture different forms of stress and negative emotions in my life. So the first thing that I need to realise is, if I want to get sober, I need to remove as much bullshit and hubris from my own mind. And that means no more blaming anybody for the reason that I drink. And that doesn't just mean blaming my past, blaming my childhood, blaming the scheme I grew up in, blaming structural oppression, blaming the class that I come from. Yes, there are contributory factors in every single aspect of my behaviour, of course. However, my job is not to find the fault of external things in my behaviour. My job now becomes about finding where I'm at fault. So what bullshit am I engaging in? What selfishness am I engaging in? What self-interest and motivations am I being deceitful to myself about? And so on and so forth, until eventually I become a lot more intuitive as to what's driving me, and I begin to use negative emotions as a map for what's really going on. Now, when you go into recovery or you go into any sort of like shift in your lifestyle, then you will develop a higher self that you return to when you feel engulfed by negative emotions or when you slip back into old behaviours. Some people call the higher self God, other people call it a consciousness. Basically, it's something that dwells within you, and if you can quieten everything else down long enough, you'll begin to hear it coming through. It's that thing that tells you you shouldn't have that biscuit, but you override it anyway. It's that thing that tells you, don't answer her back the way you're gonna, but you answer her back anyway. It's that thing that tells you, don't open that envelope, don't pay that money back, don't answer that phone. It's that thing that tells you they are the things, but you ignore it anyway. That's your higher consciousness. That's the highest form that you will ever take. All the pain in my life, all the difficulty, all the negative emotions that drive me to behave in ways that undermine how I really want to behave. See, all of that is when I overrule my higher self. So all of the pain and distress that I come into in life, my pride, my ego, my selfishness, my sharp tongue, my fear, my anxiety, all of these things, this occurs when I'm listening to my lower self, when I'm letting my head do all the thinking instead of my higher consciousness. Now, some of you might already get a sense that this is how your mind and body works, and that there's a lot of interplay. And some of you might not be ready to go down that street. Some of you might still be in, well, I had a shit life, or no, structural oppression is really shaping my behaviour. I'm a product of my environment. That's fine. Whatever works for you. What I've learned is the more things that I use as excuses, the more things that I use as buffers, the more things that I use as justifications for my own vitriol, for my own resentment, for my own anger, then the more I'm just creating the circumstances to become more unhappy and more dishonest. So my personality, as it was a problem. So I had to learn a new way to live so that over time, some of the more harmful, toxic personality traits began to soften a wee bit. And part of this was also about accepting myself. And this is the big thing that people struggle with. You're not supposed to be perfect. You're not supposed to be super cool, Mr. or Mrs. Likeable. You're not supposed to be pure, switched on, focused all the time. You're not supposed to be, I'm pure up for hard work all the time. I'm up dead super early. I'm pure switched on. I'm just Mr. or Mrs. Wonderful. Although people put themselves through a hard time aspiring to these things and beat themselves up when they don't meet their own impossible standards, you have to learn to accept yourself. So there are things about me that I have to say, well, that's just the way I am. You know, negative personality traits like being pig-headed, like coming across arrogant, like being self-concerned, and sometimes not having enough space in my mind for what other people are going through and how other people feel. Very much keen to project the opposite of that. But at the same time, there's always a manoeuvring going on, there's always self-interest going on, and I'm sure that's the same with most people. The point is, now I have an insight where I can actually catch myself doing that and return to this place of sanity, return to this peace that dwells within me. And all I can say is that the longer you're sober and the more you stay around sober company and the more that you practice these certain principles of being honest with yourself about what's really going on and no blaming the news and no blaming politicians and no blaming your pals and no blaming your family, then the more intuitive you become about what emotions you're feeling and where they actually came from. Because let's remember, over time, if you're just accumulating negative feelings and you're not doing anything about them as they come up, it just ends up culminating in this negative energy that just feels like a depression. And I chased mental health diagnosis for years on and off the drink because I wasn't ready to accept that a lot of my mental health problems were about how I was perceiving life and the lifestyle that had emerged in order to try and manage those painful feelings. Anybody out there who is struggling with regulating their own behaviour, whether they're an addict, whether they just think they're overdoing it, the key for me personally has been to get more and more insight into what drives my behaviour and the behaviour that I engage in and how that reacts in the world and creates emotional responses within me. Over time I got more intuitive, and over time I've managed to learn a new way of thinking about life and learn a new way of trying to live life. No perfect. Life's a bit sore sometimes. You get caught up worrying about things. But at the same time, the problems that I have today are nothing like the problems that I had back then when I was drinking, where every day was a nightmare. I'm sitting here now eating broccoli, cauliflower, chicken with some cheese and salsa on it, right? Back then, this would have been a McDonald's, bottle of Bucky. I would have been smoking fags in between eating my dinner. Now that's only a short space of time. And that's my life turned around. I'm doing well with work. I'm pursuing life opportunities. I have a son and a family. Nothing focuses my mind like all of these new gifts of recovery. But none of that's possible if I return back to the old ways, if I start believing the idea that, well, I've had a long time away from it now, maybe I can have a wee drink to celebrate all this success that's happening. Don't know what people's experience out there is. I can just speak for myself, but somebody put it to me like this, and it was dead powerful the way they said it. They looked right in the eyes of me and they says, And they could see the pain I was in. They could see how I was intellectualising recovery too much. And I couldn't understand the simplicity of it, because the addictive thinking had betrayed me. I was a slave in my own body. And they looked me right in my eye and just says, "Darren, it's this simple. You never have to drink again. You never have to drink again, ever. You never have to drink again." And that's when I started to understand it was that simple. And I just broke that down one day at a time. Sometimes broke it down hour to hour, minute to minute. The day, all I need to do is no drink. Tomorrow, worry about that when it comes. Every day is another chance. You don't ever have to drink again. I just thought I would share that because I did a meeting tonight and I felt like I just felt nice after going to a meeting. I hadn't been to one for a while. If anybody out there is struggling, there's plenty of information available. I'm not that hard to reach as well if you're struggling and you want to talk to somebody. Otherwise, sorry for rabbiting on this much. I'm going to get back to my cauliflower, my broccoli, and I wish you all well, and I hope to see you all again next year when I'll be, hopefully, 3 years sober. Take it easy.